The Smithsonian Faculty Fellowship Program represents a rewarding academic professional development opportunity for faculty at Montgomery College. The fellowships are a product of a unique collaboration between Montgomery College and Smithsonian Center for Education and Museum Studies. It's the first of its kind between the Smithsonian Institution and a community college.
Rebecca Hopkins Razavi earned an MA in the Writing Seminars program at Johns Hopkins University. Since 2008, Rebecca has taught for the English department as an adjunct professor on the Germantown campus of Montgomery College. In addition, she has taught courses for the Gateway to College and the Pathways to Success programs, both of which serve students at risk of academic failure. She serves as faculty advisor to the Globe, MC Germantown's student paper. She currently serves as interim director of the Hillman Entrepreneurs Scholarship Program based at Montgomery College's Germantown campus. Before joining Montgomery College, Rebecca was a writer for the NIH's National Institute on Drug Abuse, where she prepared research and public health documents to support drug abuse treatment research. Rebecca has self-published 3 chapbooks of poetry and had over 20 poems published in journals, including Southern Poetry Review, Potomac Review, and Bottomfish magazine.
Hi, I'm going to talk to you all about a course that I taught last semester. It was a section of English 102 using the Smithsonian Faculty Fellowship as its base. The course that I taught was English 102, which is titled Critical Thinking, Writing, and Research. It's the second in the series of composition classes that we teach here at Montgomery College. The theme that I used, which was based on Smithsonian, all the things that we did during the last year, was an identity-based model of social change, which is a model that I came up with after going through this wonderful experience. So I'm going to talk to you about how I put the course together, and then I'll talk to you about the elements that went into the semester. I think of this as a recipe. For the Smithsonian Faculty Fellowship infused English 102 that serves the students that I have. The ingredients for the course were multiple. The first one was, of course, the course objectives, because we have to meet those objectives that have to do with critical reading, critical thinking, and research. We also have a required text, which looks like this, and it's called Current Issues and Enduring Questions. And it has, it's primarily essays. It has other things too, but it was the text from which I chose the essays that we read. The theme of the fellowship, and of course, taking the students down to experience the Smithsonian museums. So what do? We take all of these ingredients, we put them into a big pot. We add discussion that we had with the other faculty fellows and with curators and directors at the museums. We had readings about both American history and about museum literacy. And of course, we took multiple trips to the museum. So put all of that into a great big pot. And what did you do? I woke up about a week before classes started with this idea. It was like a fully cooked course. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do up until that moment, but when I woke up, it just came together. I had big questions. I had coordinated assignments and a big trip to the National Mall, which I'm going to talk to you all about. So that's how it went. Of course, the other ingredient in any of these courses are our students. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction to who was in the class. Each one of these little pins on this world map represents a home for one of the students in my class. So we had students from all over. And so for each of those students, they were given one of these, which you might recognize as the blue book. They're used for examinations typically, but I used them as kind of a passport into and out of the class. So everybody had one of these. On the inside panel, the first thing we did was put together each one of them made their own personal flag that described themselves. So what that meant was that we're going to put this all together, but what happened was I asked them to talk about their values, and these are some of the values that came up on their flags. And here's an example of one of the flags. What was also really neat is that doing this at the beginning of the semester, there were all kinds of serendipitous things that happened. So this student loves violins, he loves trains, and so it was really nice when we got down there. He saw a train at the museum and just went wild. We heard violins on the metro going down. So it was just, it was nice to get a chance to know the students before we started so that we could, kind of notice those things when they came up. So that was their values. I also asked them about their aspirations. And so just to give you an idea, we had, of course, students in all different majors who were coming here. I also had one student, Pelagie, who aspired to meet the President of the United States, which she kind of did. She at least had her picture taken and has a souvenir from that experience down at the mall. I asked them what they like to do for fun, and these were some of the things that they mentioned. The Redskins, dance, motorcycles, horror films, there's our trains again. And you would see those come up on some of their flags as well. And in addition to that, things that they came up on their own, some of the students talked about homesickness. They had come from a long way away, people that they missed, people that they had lost, and so some of their flags did represent those kinds of experiences. Some of the others mentioned hardships that they had or that they were going through. We had one who had insomnia and another one who had food poisoning, therefore the crab on this particular flag. And they did present their flags so that we all got a chance to know each other at the beginning of the semester. So those were the students. We put them all into a big pot, right, along with all those other ingredients, and we came up with this wonderful, crazy soup of a semester. So what I did, because this is an identity-based model, this is an example, or this is a representation of that model. You can see that it says 1, 2, 3, 4, there are 4 sections to the course, and I'm going to kind of walk you through. Each one was a unit of our course. But before I do that, I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of where the root of this idea came from. This is from the report put out in 1995 by the United Nations that concluded, for deeply rooted shifts in world views and lifestyles to occur in a sustainable fashion, they must evolve within socially healthy, productive units, in other words, within families. So this is something that I believe very deeply, but it also is something that the research is showing, is that big social changes actually start with the family unit. They start around the kitchen table. So that's where our semester started. That's where our first unit was. So Unit 1, Home, where political identity is formed. And I'll come back to this in just a second. This was the first exhibit that we saw. In the classroom, what we did, we had a unit, it was called Identity Politics. Using this text that I was showing you about, this is Stanley Fish. Stanley Fish has written an article called When Identity Politics is Rational. So their first assignment was to write an essay, an argument analysis. So they were going to analyze this argument that identity politics can be rational. And that's based on the course objectives, that would be our first assignment to do that. So just to kind of give you an idea, this is actually a picture from the exhibit that we saw as well, but it also has a nice definition of identity politics, which is simply when a person's identity determines their politics. So the simple example is we had a lot of women vote for Hillary Clinton. We had a lot of African Americans vote for Barack Obama in the last election. And so that's the concept and that we were going to be exploring. Now, because I also learned a lot from Sarah Ducey and the others in the Paul Peck Humanities Institute, we started every unit by looking at a piece of artwork, and then used that both to kind of ground us and to give us a way to look at things. So from art to analysis. This was the first piece of artwork that we looked at, and it's a stencil from an artist named Carla Walker. Rather than just kind of jump to a conclusion, what I wanted them to do was look really carefully at it and to kind of analyze it, the way that you would analyze an argument. So we did that by looking at what the facts were. What did you see? Who do you see? What do you see? Where do you think this is taking place? When do you think it is taking place? So when they did this, they were looking here and they said, well, it looks like it's outside. We've got 3 characters. It was just kind of gathering all that initial data. And then after that, we looked at it again and we looked at it in terms of narrative. So what do you think is happening in this picture? What do you think happened before? And which would have been what caused it, and what do you think happened after this? What do you think the effects of this piece were? So it kind of gives you a visual way of analyzing a narrative. So again, they're looking here and they're saying, well, what do you think happened before? Do you think that this girl is winding this up and this guy's flying? What was interesting is that it kept them from coming to some conclusions. It kept them looking at it really objectively, which was great. But then I did jump and I asked them to think about, what does it remind you of? Do you have memories that this is associated with? For me personally, it kind of reminds me of some children's books that I was exposed to. Did you ever have an experience that this is like? The story that we're talking about, is that familiar? You're trying to find connections. Is there a song, a historical event? Is there another piece of artwork that this reminds you of? Because writers do refer to things that are outside of the realm of the actual canvas. So it's a totally legitimate way to look at it, and it also makes it a nice way to have a more personal reaction to it. Whoops. That was our connections. Oh, no, that's right. Okay. And so the fourth way of looking at this has to do with your reaction. So only once you've kind of gotten all that information are you going to look at this piece and start to make some judgments. So what was your reaction? We're looking at pathos and ethos. Logos is the third one, but we're looking at these two right now. So pathos has to do with your emotions. Did it give you an emotional reaction? Did you have an emotional reaction when you were looking at this? Did it raise any ethical questions for you? And only at this point did the students start to talk about things like, well, you know, it kind of reminded me of slavery. Until this point, they hadn't actually gotten to that, but it was just a wonderful way to kind of make them look very, very closely at this. And then how do your reactions affect your opinion of this artwork? Does it make you appreciate it more? Does it make you not like it? Would you like it on your living room wall? These kinds of questions. What is your reaction to it? So this was our first piece of artwork. We took this and took it one step further. This is actually one of my students, but she said, you know what, this made me think about what that artist was trying to get across. Luckily, Carla Walker has told us what she was trying to get across, so we were able to look at that, and she said, I wanted the viewer to either giggle nervously or get pulled into history, fiction, into something totally demeaning and possibly very beautiful. So we're able then to pull that into our experience of the artwork. And of course, then their question is, does she succeed, now that we know what she was trying to get across? So the idea is you take a piece of artwork and then you can apply it. So we're going to transfer that using analysis. The question is then, did Stanley Fish make his case that identity politics is justified? So their first papers came back full of rich analysis and careful looking at the details that were in his article. So that was Unit 1, Identity Politics. Where this came in for us then at the museums was through an exhibit called Within These Walls. And it's a house that was originally up in New England that has been totally dismantled and then reconstructed in the National Museum of American History, which is the museum that we really focused on. And you can go behind the scenes and see the living rooms and see the kitchen and see the bedrooms. You can see a lot of the inside of the house. And it also tells the stories of the families that lived in there over 5 generations. We were really fortunate to have this man here, Bill Yangst, show us around. And this was thanks to Manjula Kumar at the Smithsonian, who connected us with him. Bill Yangst was one of the original curators who put this exhibit together, actually before the museum was even the Museum of American History, when this was the Museum of American Science and Technology, I think. So he was able to walk us around, and he knew the stories of the people, he knew the significance, he knew why they had chosen the things that were in the exhibit. So it was really nice. Pelagie kind of summed it up when she came back. She said, you know what, during my visit, what surprised me was the feeling that I felt. I expected to see things, but not actually feel it. So again, you know, it makes that very deep connection with something that you might just kind of wander through and not look at unless you're looking at it very carefully. So this was Unit 1. Unit 2. So we're moving now from what happens in the kitchen and the family, and then what happens outside of that. So right outside of the museum, the exhibit Within These Walls, is the actual Greensboro Lunch Counter, which was originally in a Woolworths in North Carolina, and was kind of jump-started the whole civil rights movement when a number of black college students decided to go and ask to be served in a counter where they were not, by the policy of the times, were not allowed to be served. So we went from that exhibit to this one, and we started to talk about how change starts with just a few individuals. What's really wonderful about this is that the individuals who started the civil rights movement were also college students, so it's not, it's something that of course our students have a connection to as well. Our unit focused on essays in our book on racial profiling. We did this, and the assignment that they had, after we did some role plays, kind of what would you do, sort of role plays, what would you do if we had been attacked by terrorists and you're in an airport and someone comes through and they just look suspicious to you. Do you feel like you should treat them like everybody else, or should you actually do some profiling to make sure that, in your mind, that their country is safe? And so we gave them some difficult scenarios to look at, and that's kind of how we started this unit. And then they were told to pick one group. Could be women, could be African Americans, could be Asians. These are all stereotypes, right? Could be Arabs or Muslims, could be American Indians. And it could be some other group, some other demographic in our society. And then you take that group and you look at it in terms of one kind of profiling, because it's not just at the airports, right? It is at the airport, but it's also on the job. It's also in school. Racial profiling happens in our court systems, and racial profiling happens by the police. What was interesting here to me was that the students focused exclusively on the airport and the police kind of racial profiling. So they looked at it from different points of view, but that was it. And then their assignment was to write a short argument. So they had to either say that racial profiling was acceptable or it is not acceptable. And that was their second essay. So start again with the art. This was the fantastic piece of artwork that we looked at for this unit. This is a portrait by Kehinde Wiley, African-American artist, who paints gigantic pictures. Some of them are in the museums. There's one in the National Portrait Gallery downtown that's just magnificent and very, very big and bright. This particular one is a triple portrait of Charles I, and all of his paintings are based on some kind of classical piece of artwork, and then he transforms it by putting in, changing the characters so that the people he's portraying are African Americans. Later he did some internationally, but originally they were African Americans, people that he found on the streets originally, and then he went on and he has a lot of kind of, like Jay-Z, I think he's done, and some other kind of rap star. But this was one of the earlier ones. So we're looking at this really carefully, the same way that we did at the other one. We looked at the facts, right? The who, when, what's going on. The narrative, what do we think is happening, what happened before, what happened after. What kind of connections we have. Do we have any connections with either the colors or the design or maybe the characters themselves? And the appeals, which is the ethical and the emotional appeals that the author is trying to create. Now, what was also interesting about Kehinde Wiley as an artist is that he also paints with, he has a social cause behind his paintings. So and what he's trying to do is take something that may have a negative connotation in our society and change the connotation. So the connotation of the young black man in a hoodie, it now has dignity and respect and positive characteristics. So I asked them to take, when they were thinking of racial profiling, to think of a solution for the issue that they have decided to tackle, and to take that issue and then to incorporate it into their paper. So I have here just an example of one from Sean's paper. He wrote a paper about border security, and his conclusion was, this is verbatim, right? The border security needs to be increased so that fewer people are jailed for illegal activity, and the availability of marijuana can be decreased so fewer teens are involved in the war on drugs. So he's come up with a solution in his paper, whether we agree with it or not, right? Want to get him starting to think about how you can actually solve these issues. Okay, so that was racial profiling, and that was Unit 2. I have another one for you. That's right. This is Michael, and this is actually from his his final paper, but he went back to the Greensboro Lunch Counter and concluded, actually I think this was in his introduction, started his paper, in 1960, history was made when a few African-American college students sat at a whites-only lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina in protest of the segregation policy. This sparked a series of similar demonstrations that eventually resulted in the changing policies regarding civil rights. This phenomenon is the very thing that makes America the great country it is. When the people think a policy or law is unjust, they stand up and protest until the policy is changed. It's because of this that we will never stop improving as a country. Today, Americans have risen up and voiced their demand for medical marijuana policy change. Right down to the topic that he wanted to be writing about. So we started in the home. We went to Unit 2 where we talked about the impact that a couple of individuals would have. And then our third unit actually focused on mass movements. We were very fortunate also in the National Museum of American History to be able to view an exhibit that talks, that you see 1963. That's actually a two-part exhibit. One part is 1863 when the Emancipation Proclamation was passed. The other is 1963 when the March on Washington occurred, asking for the civil right, as part of the civil rights movement. So we went down, we did see that exhibit. What we also did, though, for this one, because we were using the essays that are in our book, there are a whole series of essays on immigration reform. So that actually was the policy that we were looking at for our class. We were so fortunate when we got down to DC. This is a photograph that we took when we were on the mall, because immigration reform is in the news these days. There were protesters fasting for immigration reform on the mall as we got down there. So this was their tent. They were putting together a quilt. You could sign different things. It was a very interactive experience. And one of my students, Tron, said, during my visit, I was honestly surprised to experience the real deals on immigration reform, like people fasting for equality. So that was another one of those great serendipitous things. This was the piece of artwork that we looked at for this unit. They're Chinese immigrants that were coming in on the bottom of a ship. And we looked at it, and we looked at, again, facts, narrative, the connections, what our reactions were in terms of ethics and emotion. And what was kind of interesting about this discussion is that this particular piece of artwork was a journalistic piece of artwork, but over the years, journalists had used it to portray different things. So we ended up by kind of thinking, okay, what title would you give this piece of artwork, knowing nothing else about it? And then we looked at the series of titles that the artwork had actually been given. So that was the artwork for this particular unit. Then we went down and we saw this wonderful exhibit. The fourth piece of our class and the fourth piece of our trip down to the National Mall actually took us to the National Capitol. So Unit 4 is where we talked about where national policy actually gets changed. Their essay assignment was an independent research paper. They were supposed to focus on one current policy debate, and they had a long list that they could choose from. And then the assignment was, using everything you've learned this semester, including a reference to your trip to the mall, make a policy recommendation to Congress. Kwong said, the visit would help me with my research paper by the concerns of, this is kind of a little tangled up, but I think you'll get it. The visit would help me with my research paper by the concerns of the current snags with our government and what we might have to come up with to solve our current struggles. In my case, global warming. They didn't pick little struggles, they picked big ones. So those were the 4 units of our course. Now, because we started in the home, what I wanted to do was actually replicate that experience. So instead of a final exam or kind of set an academic ending to our course, what we had instead was breakfast. Students brought in croissants, they brought in fruits. One student brought in his waffle maker and made waffles for the whole class. We had tea and coffee and juice. And I also brought in a whole bunch of newspapers that I had picked up on my way into college. So we had the daily papers there at the table to refer to. And that's what we did. So for the next 2 hours we sat, we had breakfast, we talked about the semester, but we also read the papers and looked at what was on the front page of the papers. And what I'm trying to do really is trying to make this something that's part of real life, that's not part of just academia. So it was a really, really nice way to finish the semester. And these are just a couple of quotes, not necessarily at the breakfast, but here we all sitting around the table. Pelagie says, I actually got the chance to experience and feel the significance of the exhibits. You can't see him, he's behind Michael here, but Sean said, I was so surprised to see how much thought went into the exhibits. And he would come out of the exhibits asking questions. What do you think that, look, they didn't talk about, trying to remember what they were. When we went to the Capitol, they were talking about the coins, I think it was, and he kind of said, well, I'm interested, it's interesting that they didn't talk about the In God We Trust piece of this. Why do you think that is? So he was really looking at the thought that went into in terms of decisions that had to be made. Latifa said, I see myself visiting again. I plan on looking at other exhibits as well as taking someone who's never been to the Capitol or the museums so I can share my knowledge with them and learn more myself. I think she had a wonderful trip down there. Whoops, there was one other one, that's okay. So that's my course, Teaching English 102 with an identity-based model of social change. And, oops, there we go. And just kind of to sum up everything, my dream. So my dream for my students is that they learn to question their own assumptions and their own biases. I want them to understand that they have the power to create social change. And I'd like to empower them to expand their horizons physically and intellectually by things like going to the museums that the Smithsonian has. So that's it.